I'm going to welcome our next practice into our next collective renewal strategy session with our dear SCRR adjunct faculty, Zeruiah Buchanan. And I wanted to say a couple words about Zeruiah, and I welcome you in the chat. If any of you have been part of our SCRR Postvention through a Liberated lens body of work and have gleaned the goodness from Zeruiah's teaching, please share in the chat and so that we can welcome Zeruiah. I want to say a couple things before Z starts, which is that our invitation to wrestle with postvention after a death by suicide in our community is not to say, if you've never experienced this, this isn't for you, but is actually to welcome us all in, because it's our belief that as an ecosystem, as multiple structures, all of us have been impacted by death by suicide. And all of us in some way, 1%, 2%, 50, 100, are deeply invited to step into the ways that we make meaning, that we think about and hold the aftermath. And then even one more layer, how we as community members are creating the cultures and the structures that actually can interrogate pain that we might be either intentionally or unintentionally contributing to, or interrogate the conditions that might be creating the unlivableness. And so what Zeruiah is going to be walking us through is how we as collectives can again reimagine how we hold pain and reimagine how we talk about pain. So it's with great pleasure and deep honor to welcome Zeruiah in. And my invitation is, if any of you are thinking, I don't do that work, I'm not a crisis responder, let's together think about what are the small ways we can transfer the goodness of Zeruiah's teaching into the work that we hold and we're accountable for. Zeruiah.
Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen really quickly, and then we can get started. And I'll also say, hi, Mom. My mom's here today. Hasn't been to one of these yet. So we'll see how that goes. So thank you so much, Lyra, for that framing. And thank you so much for the kind words in the chat. Zeruiah Buchanan, pronouns she, her, hers. And today I was a little bit uncomfortable coming in and talking about this, but I'm going to do it anyway because I think it's important. We're going to be talking about suicide postvention, but we're also going to be talking about critical reflexivity, and that can be applied anywhere. We're going to be talking about suicide postvention, which means we'll be talking about suicide a little bit. So if at any point in time you feel like you are activated, I want you to take care of yourself. I don't want you to worry about whether or not I'm worried about you dropped off or you turn your camera off or anything like that. Take care of you. This is what this whole thing is about. This whole Summer Institute too is about. And while you're taking care of yourself, if you need help, ask for it. Direct message whoever you need to direct message. Probably not me right now. So Oriana, Lyra, Nikki. If you need to direct message one of those people, or if you need to reach out to someone who is a part of your support system, do that, please. I also have resources on the next slide that I'll briefly go through. During this time, I also ask that you lean into discomfort. Michelle said something, I was like, yes, ma'am. And I don't know how many books I'm reading right now. I'm reading a lot, but one of the books that I'm reading right now, one of the things that an author said was, within growth, you feel discomfort because it's new. You've never been here before. So lean into growth today. Critical reflexivity, that's also my title. I probably shouldn't have put it in the notes, but we did. So when I say critical reflexivity, I'm thinking about this cyclic process of questioning. I'm an epidemiologist, so I'm constantly asking questions. If that's not your thing, that's okay. But asking questions of ourselves, asking questions of our professional work, and figuring out exactly where we're at, what our positionality is, how this works, why we're doing what we're doing. These are all the questions, and we'll go through a lot of them again. And then finally, open-mindedness. Yeah, just stay open. If you're like, this is not for me, that's okay. We can talk about something else later. For sure. What is your process? What are you doing to keep yourself afloat? And I'll keep an open mind with you as well. It's a multi-directional learning space. So like I said before, here are some resources. If you are able to get to the PDF, which you should because it's online, the actual resource word is a hyperlink to these collectives in these therapist directories. So if you need that, go ahead and take that. The helplines and lifelines are up here. A lot of them are for different communities that are marginalized, but nonetheless, anyone can use them. So please use them if you need them. So a little bit about me, because I can't ask you to be vulnerable without being vulnerable myself. I'm a Black, queer, hard of hearing cis woman. I was originally from New York, so born and partially raised, and then lived in Tennessee for the rest of my formative years. I went to the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. If you know anything about Knoxville, I got stories that are both exciting and both traumatizing. And from my master's in public health, I went and I worked at state Medicaid in Arizona, which was also an experience. That's how I'll put it. And that inspired me to go back. I already knew I was going to go back for my doctorate, but that inspired me to go back quickly to my doctorate, where I'm studying epidemiology. In Arizona, I was a suicide prevention epidemiologist. And in that, I learned that policy is really important, which is why I'm working on policy now. Policy and suicidality with Black youth is the focus of my dissertation, which we're going to get on a roll, Leora, amen. I also worked at a psychiatric hospital where I again learned that I did not need to be a psychiatrist. I needed to work at a broader level of the social ecological model, which I'll show you a little bit later. During this process and as I got older, I learned about a lot of family trauma, a lot of family experiences with suicidality. Through the work that I'm doing now, I learned that I have experienced passive suicide ideation before. And this is why I'm in the work that I'm in, for myself, for my family, people. And part of this whole entire picture of my positionality is really about the humanization of data and policy. That's what I started off with. Humanization of data and policy. Probably why I was like the top recruited doctoral student too. I was like, this is what it is. This is what we're doing. And through that humanization, there are steps towards liberation, which is why it's so important. One of the books that I'm reading that I actually remember that I'm reading is Black Feminists. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing this correctly, but they talk about it in the book, Combahee River Collective. And in the statement, they say a Black woman's liberation is everyone's liberation. And so through my liberation, I hope to liberate other people, and I hope to work through that with and for people. That's why I'm doing the work that I'm doing. I'm also focusing on policy because I believe that the things that we're dealing with now are because of the environment we've created as a society. And in epidemiology in particular, what we do is like to point fingers at individuals and say, this is your problem, it's not ours. Or we like to just state issues and not do anything about it. So hopefully you'll see that change as I get older. One of the analogies that I always talk to Leora and Oriana about, and I spoke to them about it on Monday, was the flower analogy. We do not ask flowers if they're dying in an environment to get their stuff together and pull themselves up by their bootstraps. We change the environment. And so one of the questions I sit with all the time is, why can't we offer that to human beings, people that look like us? And it has a lot to do with the fact that our conversation and our language, as Leora has talked about, is dehumanized. So what are we going to do? Humanize it, hopefully. So I'll tell you a little bit about my journey. As I said before, suicide postvention epidemiologist, assigned randomly to Postvention, which Yay, okay. I don't know what this is. I'm fresh out of grad school. I'm doing presentations and I'm reading a lot, but am I learning anything? I'm not sure. Then I meet Leora and her beautiful self, and we work on embracing and expanding postvention with Francesca. And in that, I learned a lot of stuff. I did a lot of listening. People said I was teaching, and I said, was I? I don't know, because I was learning a lot and I was doing a lot of listening, active listening. And then that evolved into school-based suicide postvention from a liberated lens, where we had a learning collective, as I like to call it. And I learned a lot there too. And the journey doesn't end because we have some things to announce later, of course, as we figure it out. So, in the start of that journey, language was the first thing. I was like, we need to sit here and we need to figure out exactly what we need to say to neutralize this language and destigmatize it. And I was like, this is the figure I'm going to come up with. But per challenging me, or not challenging me, I like to say challenging because I had a challenge with it. Challenging that as I was talking to Leora, as I was talking to Francesca, people with lived experience with suicidality, and that was before I even know I had my own lived experience with it, I was like, actually, this is not to neutralize language. It is to reduce stigma. It is to create a brave space, but it's also to humanize people who are experiencing suicidality every day. Because we can say we're preventing it and that they're going to just stop having suicidal experiences, but is that the reality? And through language, through data, through policy, and the humanization of that are steps towards liberation, which I know are my goals, career and personal. And so that led me to sit with myself. And we don't always like to sit with ourselves. I don't always like doing it either. But I had to make sure that while I was doing this work, which I know is near and dear to every person I've met in this work's heart, including mine, in whatever way it is, I had to figure out how I wasn't going to be burnt out. I had to figure out where I wanted to do that work, why I wanted to do that work, and I needed to be very clear about it to make sure that I can take the steps every day that I need to take. And so in this reflexivity is this introspective reflection where it's the cyclic process of cultural humility, where I had to do multi-directional learning. I had to hold space for everybody's little t truths. And then I had to sit with myself and critically think about why I felt uncomfortable with some of it, why I was like jumping for joy for some of it, why some of it I didn't even want to repeat out of my mouth. And then that was like my intrapersonal process. And then my interpersonal slash community slash organizational process, which this is the social ecological model tinkered by Z. And I had to figure out, okay, on this level, professionally, where am I at? What am I doing? And if I'm at policy, are the things that I'm saying, the things that I'm doing, the things that I'm processing so I can heal myself and anything else, are they positively impacting the people that I know don't have a voice in this? That I know aren't a part of the discourse of suicidology, that I know aren't at the table, that I know are being invalidated on a day-to-day basis. Is it positively impacting it? And so I had to situate myself in the big picture as well. And then on top of that, there is the upstream, downstream approach. And I have to figure out where I am on that. When we're talking about care, is it upstream? We're talking about prevention. Is it in the middle of the stream? And when we're talking about postvention, are we at the lake at the end? Where am I in that work? Should I be working just at care? Should I be working at all three? What am I doing? Why am I doing it? And how do I make sure I'm not burned out? So with that, this is a very short list of questions that I have to constantly ask myself, as I said, cyclically. And in particular, what makes me uncomfortable? What what would why did it take me so long to figure out that I had passive suicide ideation? Because I was uncomfortable, because I was comfortable telling people to stop having suicidal thoughts and experiencing suicidality, but I wasn't comfortable telling myself that. What, why was that happening? How am I make space to process this? I had to process it with my therapist, but like, how are you doing that? So I wonder, are any of these questions resonating with people? Do they not like any of these questions? I'm still gonna keep them, whether or not you like it. You could tell me. And this is not something for you to like, I'm gonna take these questions and ask myself, but let me know. Mm, can come off mute, or I don't do that, imposter syndrome. I see you. I see you. Mm, thank you for bringing that out. It sure is. Okay. What makes me uncomfortable? Why? So now we're gonna move into, as I say, thank you for folks who have shared. We're gonna move into some multi-directional learning. So I want to open up the Jamboard, and Nikki's gonna do this, and I wanna ask, what might you ask yourself during introspective reflection? I wanna take a couple minutes and go in here, and any questions that you have to ask of yourself that you don't really wanna ask, and you wanna put in here, let me know. So part of this and why I'm asking you to do this is the questions I haven't asked myself, you might ask, and I need to ask myself that question. So let me know. Yes, it is not related to suicide postvention specifically. It is related to during your process of questioning, what would you ask yourself? Mm, is my thinking in the moment harmful or helpful? Mm, someone else's pain triggering pain I have not explored inside me. And so is my response about them or me? Am I truly listening? What is the relationship between freedom and suicide? And can suicide be a form of liberation? Do I get to decide what that is for someone else? I don't know who put that up. That's definitely been a question for me. Is this where I'm supposed to be? Am I right for this work? I've also asked myself that. Mm, what are we really doing when we prevent suicide? What am I really afraid of? Thank you so much for sharing. In the interest of time, we're going to keep on going because we got more questions to ask. After my introspective reflection, there's that extrospective still there. And if you haven't heard extrospective, we're gonna say that Lyra and I coined that one because we out here making up words all the time. And thank you for everybody for participating in that. So in these learnings that I had in the SCRR COP, they were deep, they were heavy. First, the language one, humanizing language. I did not know that before I came into this space. When we talked about postvention, people were like, I don't do postvention work. And I was like, yes, you do. And so we had to establish that postvention and prevention are a cyclic process and they go into each other. Now, where care is on that, I haven't gotten to yet. I don't have the answer. Then we got into our presenters. And when I tell you they were amazing and I was learning so much, I'm not going to say everybody's name because I don't want to leave anybody out. But you can go online and see who they are, and they're amazing. And the first one was lived experience. And what I sat with that was, can I sit with people in their pain? And if I can't, why? Am I listening to people when they're screaming and our systems have cut their vocal cords? The next one was grief and stigma. And what I learned there was, am I allowing people to grieve in the aftermath of suicide? Or is it a shameful process? Why is it a shameful process? And what has society done to make it such? We talked about restorative practices. I got to do a restorative circle. I was like, I've never done this before. This is beautiful. I need to incorporate this into my dissertation. And then cultural humility, where we had a panel of people reiterating what I knew about cultural humility from the textbooks, but also introducing me to what it looks like in practice. Then we had the liberated postvention one. And I was like, I'm in my dream space. What does liberated postvention look like? And if you look at these, having compassion, rooted in community, moving against stigma, long-term, co-created, adaptable as needed, each one teach one. I was like, how do we even achieve this in policy and in practice? Because we're all on a timeline. Everybody wants fidelity. Where is their space? How do I create space for this? And so then I'm also in a mental health liberation student-led group at University of Washington. We just got a grant that we're working on. But as a part of that, I needed to read this to understand what was going on within suicidology too. And so Alexander, which I believe pronounced he, him, wrote this piece on suicidism, which I had never heard of before after 3 years in the world of suicidology. And what he talks about is looking at suicide from a queer crip perspective. And I had to put it down a lot of time. I was uncomfortable with some of the things that he said. Someone asked the question, is suicide a form of liberation? He asked a very parallel, similar question. And I was like, oh, okay, no, I don't know about this because of how I came into suicidology. And as I read it, I was like, wait, someone says that they're suicidal and we take their rights away and say they don't have the capacity to make decisions for themselves. Isn't that a form of oppression? I had never thought about it that way ever before. So I was sitting with that. I was trying to think about what's going on, and it took me a month to read this. I think it's like 14 pages. That 14 pages is like maybe a tenth of what I have to read in a week as a doctoral student. So after reading this, I have all these questions. I'm all uncomfortable. And then I have to go back to my introspective reflection. And I have to figure out, where am I placed in this conversation? I'm talking about policy, but I'm also talking about interpersonal, intrapersonal levels. And then I've been talking about societal norms, and I've been talking about the intersecting power relations. So all of the isms, and I have never included suicidism. I have never really talked about what liberated postvention is. And I hadn't brought in people's lived experiences, including my own, into my work. So on the big picture, I had to ask myself, who's left out of the suicidology discourse? How am I combating suicidism and other intersecting power relations through my work? Zoomed in, again, am I sitting in discomfort with people in my work? Or am I telling them, okay, you've healed, we moved on? How does that fit into liberated postvention or liberated care or prevention if, as we defined it, we said we need long-term help, care, recovery, and renewal? How are we doing that? And am I meeting people where they are? And from the restorative circles, what I learned is, have we paused for a deep listen? Because if I'm not listening, I'm not doing the work for myself. I'm not doing it for my family. And I'm not doing it for my people either. So with that, we're going to try to do this again, except on an extrospective level. This doesn't have to be about suicide. This is the work that I do, but I know the work that I do, the work that you do is probably close to your heart. So what questions are you asking yourself? So what questions are you asking about yourself or sitting with deeply on a professional level? And the link is in the chat. What language do we need to change as school leaders and cultures when we talk about suicide? How might we, I'm gonna figure, how might we embrace non-Western cultural perspectives about death in our approaches to discussing suicide? Language is a big piece. How can we learn from generative conflict practices, skill up the way we take care of each other after a death by suicide? How can I participate in destigmatizing / removing shame from conversations about suicide in my context? We do not talk about it at our school. A retweet is there. Yes, this. Yes, that. Do we incorporate youth perspectives? Amen to that. And incorporate them and empower them to have conversations. That has been a big part of our discussion. How we do that safely, how we do that with protection and love and autonomy. Thank you so much for sharing. And those are some of the questions that I'm gonna add to my little black book that I have. So with that, this is my overall question for myself, personally and professionally. How might I create a world worth living in for myself, for my family, and for my people? Because as I heal myself, I'm taking steps towards liberation for myself. As I talk to my family about their healing, we're both taking steps. And as I talk about liberation on a professional level, I'm talking about it for my people. So this work is important, not because it's important to me, but it's an important integral piece to our society. And if we continually ask ourselves questions, continually challenge ourselves, what can we imagine in our dream space? And what one of my mentors calls me a liberation detective. What is being liberation detective other than asking questions in our dream space? And you don't have to ask yourself that, but ask yourself the most integral question to what you're going through personally, professionally, at all levels of the social ecological model, and see where it takes you. Because it's a beautiful side to be able to imagine liberation. With that, let's take a collective breath if you would like to. In and out. And thank you for joining me. Thank you for trusting me and us and for building with us. And I want to say thank you to Leora, Ori, and Nikki for creating the space and allowing me to go through this.
Thank you, Zeruiah. Thank you, Zeruiah. So powerful. So powerful.